Hey everyone, and welcome to the Balanced Bodies Blueprint. I am your host, Vinny Russo.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Erin Stansfield.
And we're shifting gears from all the conventional fitness narrative you hear on most fitness podcasts, as our main emphasis lies in preventative healthcare, adopting a holistic approach to nutrition, and challenging the traditional views on various fitness topics.
Our mission with this podcast is to provide you with the information you need to achieve optimal health.
All right, and on today's podcast, we will be going over some Q&A questions that were given to me via TikTok. So I asked some people that are some of my followers, if they have any questions that they want me to answer on a podcast. And I took, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 questions that are pretty similar in nature. So I feel like it would be a good podcast episode because it encompasses a few things that all sort of relate to each other. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go over 5 questions. I'll say the questions now. Number 1 is, does carb cycling work? Number 2 is, does counting macros work? Number 3 is, can you start dieting right away by just cutting 500 calories? Because that's usually what every coach tells you to do for some reason. Then is there a limit to the amount of muscle you could put on naturally? I thought that was an awesome question. And then finally, one question that was from a friend of mine who knows I'm going through an injury said, can you lose body fat with an injury that actually prevents you from doing cardio? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my experience. But before we do that, just want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Legion Athletics. Use the code RUSSO, RUSSO, for 20% off your first order, then double the Legion points after that. I do recommend Legion supplements for the one simple reason that they provide evidence-based research for why they use the amounts in terms of their ingredients and how much they put in. So they kind of give you the research behind that. So without further ado, let's go into these questions. I am running a TikTok live right now as well. So if there are any questions or if you guys agree or don't agree with what I say, just leave a comment and I'll make sure to get back to you after this. So question number 1, does carb cycling work? For those of you who don't know what carb cycling actually is, it is a dieting strategy where you basically alternate between high carb days, which are days that are designed really to replenish glycogen stores in your muscle tissue and liver, obviously. But then those stores can actually be depleted after like really intense workouts, but they're made to sort of fill those stores up. And low carb days, which is where you take your carbohydrate intake and you bring it down pretty significantly. And that purpose or the idea behind that is really to create this sort of larger calorie deficit during those days to help elicit some fat burning. This method is primarily used and preached to by other nutrition coaches, nutritionists, as a way to optimize fat loss. I think that it's really good for muscle retention. Plus, I think it's really good for a psychological benefit, which I'll talk to in a second. But I feel like the muscle retention and the psychological benefit really makes carb cycling an effective strategy. But so when we look at like high carb intake and throwing those into the week, whether it's 2 days or 3 days, it helps. What I believe is it helps slow down the overall metabolic adaptation that's often associated with this continuous linear dieting, which basically, if you could slow that down, that's going to help support this ongoing fat loss and basically reduce the amount of stagnancy that is seen with a continuous linear dieting phase. I feel like when you have these high carb days and they help restore these glycogen levels within your muscle and liver tissue, I feel like that's really, really important for overall exercise and performance. So if you're increasing your exercise and performance, or at least supporting that, and you're supporting that recovery while you're dieting down, that's going to lead to more efficient results because your performance is higher in the gym, right? So you're maintaining muscle tissue. Maintaining muscle tissue through a dieting phase will only benefit you. So I think having those high carb days just alone for the slowing down a little bit of a metabolic adaptation that can happen. It's going to happen, but I feel like it slows it down just a little bit. And then the muscle retention through, or I'm sorry, the muscle retention through um, enhanced performance by having those glycogen stores nice and full for those intense workouts. I feel like those help, but I really, really think it's the psychological aspect here that helps us make this an effective strategy for dieting, because it really helps with overall adherence to a diet. And if you have more adherence to your diet, you're going to have more efficient results. And the few ways that it helps with this overall adherence is it reduces monotony of dieting. Um, the fact that you know that a high carb day is coming, it'll help keep you motivated during those low days when you're feeling low in energy and you're getting some cravings. You know a high carb day is coming right behind it, or in a few days. It helps improve your mood, which will definitely help with motivation. And you're going to have this, you're going to have a sense of more energy with these intermediate high carb days compared to just always being in a constant calorie deficit. So I just feel like it helps make it easier to stick to your dietary plan. So does carb cycling work? Yes, it does. I feel like it works. Excuse me. I feel like it works in a few ways, and one is helping with muscle retention. One is helping with slowing down the rate of metabolic adaptation to avoid the amount of stagnancy that you would normally see in a linear dieting phase. And the psychological benefits alone, number one, being motivated for that high carb day coming, happy when you get that high carb day coming. That helps reduce a little bit of stress as well. But it just makes it easier to stick to that dieting plan. So I do agree with carb cycling, and I actually use it with my clients. Not so much in like high, medium, low days or high, low days. It's more or less on off, or I do like a 5-2 or a 6-1. Those are my two favorite strategies with having those higher carb days. 5 days in a further deficit, 2 days feed up, whether that's back to back or whether it's a good amount of days in between. So it's like maybe like Saturday might be a high carb day, then 2 low carb days after that, then Monday's a high carb day, then 3 low carb days after that. So splitting it up evenly. So let's go into question number two. Question number two is, does counting macros work? And the simple answer is yes. And counting macros is really where you have someone track their protein, their carbs, and their fats, rather than just focusing strictly on the calorie content for the day. It's more or less they're focusing on a more individual aspect of dieting. It's not just a broad calorie. It's more or less, well, what makes up those calories? You're still tracking calories if you're counting macros, but you're really trying to make sure like all the calories aren't coming from like fats and carbs and some protein. You're really making an effort to try to dial in how you're getting your calories for the day. So if you are tracking macros, you are tracking your overall calories, right? But you just literally have more data to work with. So essentially, you really know your location in terms of where you are, and then you could create a plan on where you need to go. I do love this strategy as a good way to help maintain more of a lifestyle based dieting approach, because you become more food aware, right? You actually know what foods are comprised of. You can have a ton of flexibility because you can add in whatever food you really want as long as you know the macros for the serving that you're eating. You can adjust how frequent you actually feed yourself based off of your day. It doesn't have to be like every X amount of hours you need to eat. It's literally like, oh man, like I got so busy, I missed a meal. I'm gonna have to add some extra calories into my next meal, right? And I think it's really, really easy to do now with all like the apps that are currently out there today. So I think it's very easy to do. It's not so tedious to where you need a pen and paper and your calculator and you're trying to add everything up. Apps do this stuff for you, so it's making it more easy and more convenient for the user. The problem with it though is that people think initially counting macros is very tedious. And I think that's because they just don't want to learn something new. Like if they never done it before, they don't want to learn something new. Learning something new is difficult, and people don't like things to be difficult. I also think, because they already associate it with like being tedious and counting numbers and everything has to be to a T, that it's going to add more stress in their life. When little do they know that once you get used to it, it actually becomes second nature. And we have these apps that make it so easy for you to do. It's almost mindless. You just plug in the food and the amount that you weighed out, and it does it for you. You don't have to do any calculations. But when you do this for a period of time in your life, it becomes that second nature, and you just know like how to eat, right? The mindfulness is really there. The mindfulness of what you're actually putting in your body, because you learn like what foods have what in them, and you work with foods that love your body more often than you don't, and it just improves your body, your association with food exponentially. That's what I really really believe. Now, if you're dieting down, I think that a structured plan that's built for you is way more efficient. I think that's what's going to give you the most efficient results as long as your consistency is there. But if you are someone who gets bored very easily of eating the same food over and over, then macros is going to be for you because you have that flexibility. I actually did macros when I won my pro card. I was doing macros. I prefer a structured plan because I don't mind eating the same foods every day, and it's just so much easier, and I don't have to think about stuff, and it's very easy to food shop and very easy to prep. Um, but yeah, I had a coach who made me do macros, which honestly I was eating cereal and stuff like that people say you shouldn't have on a diet plan. I was eating whatever I wanted, and it still got me to where I needed to be. I was extremely diligent though, like to the gram. It was a point of obsession, which honestly I think bodybuilding does that to people, and I think you need to have that. I think you really need to have that as a part of you in terms of like having like this OCD or this need to be perfect in order to actually be successful in bodybuilding. So it just went hand in hand. But overall, I think if you want to really diet down officially, a structured plan would be the way to go. But macros is phenomenal. It really is. I just think, and I've touched on this before, that it gets abused. Like if it fits your macros it is an amazing idea, but people abused it. They needed to go out and they needed to make these like fucking Pop-Tart pancake fat sandwiches, like just to show everybody, look at what I could eat on a diet and like fit in, even though it took up fucking three of their meals. They're sitting there and they're making all this. They're just taking the quality of the food got thrown to the wind because it's like, oh, well, I'm in a dieting phase and I normally can't eat Pop-Tarts. So let me just eat them at every meal. And it's like, all right, you can, but what good is that doing your body in the long haul? Right. So if you're trying to create this lifestyle, it shouldn't be about what you could get away with. It should be about focusing on doing what's best for your body the majority of the time, plain and simple. Um, so that's my thoughts on macros. Phenomenal thing to use. You have apps to make it easy. I would definitely do it because you need to know where you are in order to know where you need to go in terms of dieting phase, gaining phase, whatever it is, even maintaining. You got to know where your calories are in order to maintain. Um, so let's go into that next question because that kind of leads right into this one where it says, can you start dieting right away by just cutting 500 calories? I hate hearing this. I hate hearing this from coaches. I hate hearing it from nutritionists. I hate anyone that recommends this as a rule of thumb. To me, is a moron. It just, I never really understood the concept of 500 calorie deficits. And it's not that I didn't get what they were saying, it just never made sense to me. See, the idea is that in order to lose 1 pound of body fat, you need to have a deficit of 3,500 calories because 1 pound of fat is 3,500 calories. So what they say is like 500 calorie deficit over 7 days is 1 pound of fat loss per week. And this to me is just very ignorant because it's not true. It's not accounting for any individual differences. And just because like I bring my calories down 3,500 calories in total over 7 days doesn't mean that my body's going to tap into my body fat to accommodate for those calories. Number two, if you're a smaller person, like if you're a smaller female who naturally at maintenance eats like 1,500 calories, then you subtract 500, you're taking a third of her calories away right off the bat. But what happens when she stalls? Because that's going to happen, right? Metabolic adaptation is going to happen. So what happens then? Are you going to take her from, you were at 1500, you went down to 1000, then you're going to take her down to 500 to keep it going? It just doesn't make sense. There needs to be a percentage. There needs to be a ratio here or something. And number three is your metabolism is going to adapt to this deficit, and by slowing itself down, that's what happens. That's what metabolic adaptation is. So does this mean that when it slows itself down, do you have to do a larger cut than 500 calories in next go around to see to keep up with the progress that you want to have? Or do you have to do 500 calories again? Or because if you keep doing this, like two cuts of 500 calories is 1,000 calories. So if you eat 2,000 calories, which is, I don't know, pretty normal, you're already down to 1,000 calories within the two first manipulations. It doesn't make sense. So I know, like, here, just to give you an idea, like when I'm starting someone on a diet, I actually bring their calories up a little bit from where I believe their maintenance is. And I just have them be consistent. It's like, here's your plan. You're eating a little bit, like, wow, this is a lot of food. Okay. Just make sure you get it all in. You got to split up the meal, split it up. I don't care. Just by the end of the day, finish all your food. And that alone yields results because it's consistent. Your body is getting used to a consistent amount of food coming in. And then when I do cut calories, and this is if any coaches are listening, I literally cut maybe from 100 to 250 calories right off the bat. And I'm just like, okay, after I get them used to a little bit more food, do that little calorie cut, 100 to 250 calories, and let their body respond, right? Because the point of dieting is to be able to lose body fat with the most amount of calories in your diet plan, not to suffer and deprive yourself by always doing a 500 calorie cut every manipulation. It just doesn't make sense. And if you were ever listening to someone who said to do that, you need to stop listening to them because it doesn't make sense. If you're taking 500 calories away from me, and let's just say my maintenance is 2,500 calories, I go down to 2,000 calories, still a decent amount of food. You take Janet, who has been underfeeding for the last 10 years trying to keep weight off. She's eating 1,300 calories at a maintenance now because that's her metabolic adaptation. And you try to pull 500 calories from her. Okay, that makes sense. Don't listen to that. Don't do it. I'm glad this question was asked, and I'm glad I could shed some light on it. Let me know whether you agree or disagree. And then let's go on to our next question because we're on a roll here. Is there a limit to the amount of muscle you could put on naturally? I definitely believe so. Hence why you look at professional bodybuilders, these IFBB pros, and what they look like. They need to take stuff in order to keep getting bigger and beat that next person. I think you have a genetic limit. I think this is really influenced by genetics. And what I think with that is like, I think training experience is like a perfect example of this because you could see like newbie gains right off the bat. And then for a few, like you see it for a few years, maybe a year to 2 years. And then there's diminishing returns as you become more and more advanced because there's less growth and you're doing even more volume. And this is why people revert to using PEDs, right? They're putting in a ton of effort and they're not getting what they feel they should be getting. And because there is a genetic limit. Some people genetically have the frame to hold a lot more mass than someone else. Some people genetically have the metabolism to support a ton of muscle gain. I mean, you see these just in my head, like the visual that I'm seeing is like some tall, thin dude who goes to the gym a lot and tries to push weight, and he's shredded year round. He's very, very lean, got veins everywhere, just can't put on mass. His metabolism won't really allow it. It's just like, the more you try to feed, the more it just revs up. And some people are like, oh, I wish I had that. Do you? Because you might not even be able to, like, those people wish that they could put on muscle. And the people that could put on a lot of muscle could also probably put on a lot of fat at the same time because their metabolism will allow for it. Their frame can hold that mass. So yeah, I think a lot of it is all genetically predisposed. And I think this whole comparison on social media with trying to look exactly like one person, or you see someone and you're like, oh, I want her body, or I want his body, I want his arms, I want her legs. genetically, you guys are so different. Stop trying to do that. Have the idea to look your best at what your genetic allows, what your genetics allow. Plain and simple. Like that, that's really it. It's like this comparison obviously is the thief of joy, but you can aspire to get as close to that as possible, but you're going to always be upset because you'll never get there because genetically you're different. Genetically, you're different. So, is there a limit to the amount of muscle you can put on naturally? I'm going to say the simple answer is yes. Okay. And then going on into this last question, let me take a sip of water real quick. Going on to the last question, and this deals with me specifically. Can you lose body fat with an injury that prevents you from doing cardio? I could say yes, because I'm doing it right now. And number two, I've honestly I was never a big fan of using cardio to really lose body fat. I always saw it as a tool, not a necessity. Um, but I'm doing this right now. So I dislocated my second toe. Um, I have a screw in it and I dislocated it. So it was pretty painful. I have a fracture in that toe and I have a Y tear in the ligament beneath the toe. So I have to stay off of it as much as possible. I do a lot of accommodations, which we'll talk about in a second, to keep me active because if I don't stay active, I get very moody and I'm not myself. So I make those accommodations, which I'll talk about in a second. But you don't need cardio to lose body fat. To lose body fat, you need a calorie deficit, which is mainly going to be done through diet. You don't you don't need cardio to lose body fat. It makes it more efficient, definitely, because of the caloric expenditure, but it's not necessary. And I think if you have an injury, here's where the problem lies. If you have an injury where your overall NEAT is reduced, then that's where you can see some effects because NEAT has the biggest impact on your total daily energy expenditure that you can actually control. It's actually BMR, which has the biggest impact. But the next biggest impact, which you can actually control, is your NEAT. And that's like typing on a computer, fidgeting around, shaking your foot, getting up, walking around a little bit, just trying to, just running errands. So you could control that. You could park further away from, where you need to go in terms of like grocery store. You can make little adjustments to keep your NEAT up, so you can control your NEAT. But if that's affected, then yeah, it's going to be difficult because it has the biggest impact on how much you're expending throughout the day in terms of like what you can actually control. So if you can't really walk around that well and you're kind of like you got to sit down or you're bedridden and stuff like that, then in terms of like keeping body fat off, it's really just being able to accommodate with your diet and with adherence to your overall diet. If you, God forbid you broke your leg or whatever, and you're on crutches and you can't like go out for your normal walks, but you could still get to the gym, then you need to see those workouts as like this is your form of movement for the day. So you got to get after it. That's really it. That's the mindset you're going to have to need when you go into the gym for some type of movement. But for me, like I said, like I just feel like I need to do something or else I get pretty moody. And so I need to make accommodations. And what I did is because it is my foot and it's really just like when I press off, like so I can't run, I can't jump off of this foot. I can't run off of it. Walking, I gotta like walk with my toes up. I gotta point my toes toward my shin a little bit so I'm not pressing off of my toe. So what I did is I bought a surgical boot and an air walking boot off Amazon. So I got this little thing that I use when I walk, and I like to wear the surgical boot when I'm boxing. So my boxing coach accommodates me by keeping me just in like one designated area. We're not jumping around, we're not moving, I'm not pivoting on it, but I wear the surgical boot for extra protection just in case, because I still want it to heal, but I just need to do something. So I'm still getting a really good workout, but we're just making accommodations there. When I walk my dog, when I go out to the grocery store, when I'm walking around anywhere outside, anything like that, I wear this little air walking cast thing that I bought. Pretty cheap, but it keeps me from putting pressure on those toes. If I'm looking to get some movement I'm not going to get on, a treadmill. I'll get on a spin bike. I put my heel on it. I don't use the balls of my feet. I use my heel and I'll just go like that. I could do battle ropes. I could do an arm bike. Arm bikes are now getting, I've seen them, especially out here in Utah. They usually have them in every gym I go to. There's at least one arm bike. So I make accommodations, but if you can't, then the focus really needs to be on your nutrition, because I've had clients over the years that, number one, can't do cardio, or number two, just didn't like doing it. So we try to really focus on their overall NEAT, which is like movement, just random movement throughout the day. But the diet was the thing. If they were really consistent with their diet, they saw really good results in the amount of time that we worked together, because they were consistent with their diet. So diet plays the biggest role here. So can you lose body fat with an injury that prevents you from doing cardio? Yes, you can. So that's it for me with the questions that I took from TikTok. I do that randomly. I like doing it on Instagram a little bit more, but this was a solo episode because these questions were specifically for me. I believe Dr. Aaron is putting together a good podcast, so that'll be our next episode next week. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I shed some light in some areas that might have been a little bit cloudy or dark to you, and kind of opened it up. So real simply, let me just go through them. Does carb cycling work? Yes, I feel like it works mainly for mitigating the muscle metabolic adaptation, maintaining muscle mass, and glycogen stores, and the psychological benefits. I feel that's really the main point of the carb cycling. Does counting macros work? Yes, just don't abuse it. Can you start dieting right away by just cutting 500 calories? Anyone who tells you that, don't listen to, because it's not proportional at all. It doesn't have to be 500 calories. Just get consistent and then drop a little bit from there. Is there a limit to the amount of muscle you could put on naturally? Yes, I think it's all influenced by genetics. And then, can you lose body fat with an injury that prevents you from doing cardio? Of course you can. Just stick to your diet. So on behalf of Balanced Bodies, we just want to say thank you for joining us on this episode of the Balanced Bodies Blueprint.
We are committed to bringing valuable content. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd greatly appreciate it if you can take a moment and like it and leave a 5-star review.
On Apple, just go to the show, scroll down to the bottom and rate it there. If you're on Spotify, go to the show's page, click the 3 dots, and you can rate it there as well.
And if you believe in the power of knowledge, share this episode on your social media to try and get the information out there to as many people as possible.
And as you navigate your own path towards better health, remember that Balanced Bodies is forever in your corner. See you all next week.
The podcast content may include discussions of medical topics and health-related information. However, the information provided should not be considered exhaustive or complete, and it should not be relied upon as a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment.